So this is my September wrap-up. I've decided to do this again because I want to. Why not? In the month of September, I read 4 books. There are only 3 of them here because the 4th of which was... my mother borrowed it, and I don't have it at the moment. That's why there's only 3 of them in front of me here. All 4 of which I bought in September. I bought 4 books in September and I read all 4 of them over the course of this month. So, A, I'm very good at keeping up with the stories that I've bought. That's a great thing. I'm not so good at dealing with this behind me that I have had for a while. So yeah, this behind me is actually much smaller than it used to be because I've moved across the country for graduate school and I did not bring everything with me. I only brought some of my stuff. You would think it would be easier, but no, I just bought all of my new I just read all of the new stuff instead of reading the old stuff that I brought here. Which means that I need to spend some time and read the old stuff. And don't worry, I'm getting to it. I am in the middle of 3 things right now that are all from my old TBR. My older TBR. They're not like super old, but like I didn't finish those in September. The ones I finished in September are the ones I read in September, so take that as you will. The first one we're going to talk about is the only one I don't have in front of me right now, and that one is the Alice Network. Let's see if I get the will to find an image of the cover and put it in. Who knows? Yeah, the first one is the Alice Network by, is it Quinn? Quinn something? I'll put it on the screen in text, because I don't remember off the top of my head, and my phone is across the room. The Alice Network was a great time. It was significantly more serious than I was expecting it to be, in the sense that I was like, kind of expecting it to like take a little more time before it got to the like really intense like character misery, but nope, we moved into that pretty quickly at the beginning of that book, and it was just intense the whole way through. It was very well done. I think it was very well written. I liked the way the characters were behaving as though they were real people faced with their situations, as opposed to a lot of the time I have difficulty with historical fiction for doing this thing where it's really obvious that it's what our modern conception of the past was like, and it doesn't have that tinge of realism and realistic feeling that you find in well-written historical fiction. So it's really obvious that it's like, this is what we believe the past to be, as opposed to feeling like you're actually reading about a person who lived in the past. Yeah, so the Alice Network did a good job and did actually feel like I was reading about real people when they were writing their realistic characters, which was nice. Oh, there's a 5th one that I forgot! Everything's fine, I'll be back. There's a 5th one that I forgot to mention. So I finished 5 books this month. And also, technically, I didn't buy this one, I am borrowing. It's the rant I had before about me not reading the stuff on my TBR is still a thing, because this is new whim, and the rest of these were new whims, and these are all old whims that I need to find the whim for again. So yes, next on the list that we're going to talk about is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This is an adult fantasy. It plays with a lot of the same ideas of like portal fantasy quests and like hero's journey stuff that you see in a lot of like kids lit, like a lot of portal fantasy like Narnia and that kind of thing, but it does it from an adult perspective where the danger is more realistic and the characters are also a bit more on the side of realism than what you might see in the kids lit. As usual with Neil Gaiman, this kind of follows the types of things he likes to write. It feels like fairy tale, it feels like fiction. There is an internal logic to the world he's created that is not readily apparent to the main character, but if you work by fairy tale logic, it makes sense. I really liked the characters and the atmosphere of this story and this world. It is very dark. It is very dangerous, and it's not super inviting, and even as a story it's not super inviting. I liked how each of the characters had their own story that they were going through. We were following a very specific character who was living through his own very specific hero's journey, but the rest of the characters were also kind of living out their own stories and journeys each, and you could see those, you could see hints of those even when the main character wasn't really paying attention to them. I spent a lot of time following characters who were not the main character, which gave you a broader sense of the world, which was nice, but it also, I think, disconnected you a little emotionally from what happened in it. It was a good book. I really enjoyed reading it. It's also a lot. It's intense. The next book on my list was not intense in that way. It was intense in a very different way, and that is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This one, I will admit, I am late to the party. This came out and everyone was talking about it, and I saw it everywhere, and I heard everybody talking about it, and I was like, yeah, that sounds like exactly up my alley. That sounds like exactly the kind of thing that I'm going to love. And I was right. It just took me a while to get there, because I was moving. I feel like that's a good excuse. I feel like moving across the country is a pretty good excuse for getting behind the times on things like Red, White, and Royal Blue, which are amazing and literal gold. But after I moved, I did pick it up, I acquired it, I read it. I had to slow myself down because I didn't want to read it too fast, because it was that good. It was that good. I really liked the characters. I was expecting it to be lighter than it was. Once again, that's another kind of theme. This one, it was still very light, but it did have a very nuanced and very intellectual discussion of politics, and American politics specifically, and also of what it is like being a public figure, and whether or not you are comfortable with being a public figure and how to navigate that in a way that I find a lot of... There's a lot of romance media that tries to grapple with, well, what happens if you fall in love with a celebrity, right? And like that's a fantasy. That's a romantic fantasy that people like to read and to fall into a little bit. And this one does that. It does that same thing, but it comes at it from a very interesting angle, and it takes a really nuanced look at how that actually works. I've realized that I am 3 books into this wrap-up, and I did not give any actual, like, descriptions for the books. I just kind of told you how I felt about them. So in order from the beginning, the Alice Network is set during World War I and right after World War II, or right before World War II? It's set vaguely in World War I for sure, and then I think after World War II. So there's a woman during World War I who becomes a female spy for the British government undercover in France. And then there's a girl during World War II who is looking for her cousin who disappeared during the war. Yes, so it's after World War II. Her cousin disappeared during the war, and now she's trying to find her. And these two people cross paths, and their stories are told concurrently, and it's pretty cool and very fun. Neverwhere is about a very ordinary person named Richard who helps a girl who shows up on the side of the street bleeding one night, and suddenly everything in his life changes because he has accidentally slipped through the cracks into London below, where he kind of no longer exists in London above, in regular people London. He is no longer a regular person. His friends don't remember him. People don't see him or interact with him easily, and the only way that he can get back to where he used to be, his life as he knew it, is to go and find this girl that he helped in the middle of the night and try to figure out how to get home and become a person who can be seen again. Which is fascinating. And then the final one on the I forgot to summarize this is Red, White, and Royal Blue is about the first son of the President of the United States and one of the princes of England falling in love and having a romance. Having a good romp in a romance, to put it succinctly. And they were great. All 3 of them. I was very happy with all 3 of those reads. I think Alice Network and Neverwhere were both 4s for me, and Red, White, and Royal Blue was a definite 5 in terms of, like, my personal enjoyment of reading the material. I should probably do a video at some point about ratings and rating systems, because mine is not objective at all. It is entirely subjective. I do not try to take an outside stance on the content and how objectively good it is. I'm very subjective. It's all subject to my opinion. The next book that I read is The Good Demon by Jimmy Kajolius? It's spelled like this. I don't know how to say it. This is a spooky book that I bought. It was still September, but like I was getting in the mood for spooky, and we are heading into October, and so I am in the mood for the spook. So I got The Good Demon. This is about a character named Claire who was possessed for most of her life, and then the book starts a month after she has had her demon exorcised from her. And she's in a bad place. She liked her demon, she didn't want her demon exorcised, and she's trying really hard to figure out how to get her demon back. And everything kind of moves forward from there. She develops a friendship/relationship, kind of, with the son of the preacher who exorcised her demon from her. She goes on a bunch of adventures and covers some conspiracies and tries to figure out what's in the woods. It's a solid romp through some woods. I think it's a really good, like, there's something evil in the woods kind of a story, right? Where it's talking about demons, and it's got that nice spook factor. There's actually a couple of, like, really nice illustrations in here, if I can find one of them. Wait, there's a couple of, like, really nice illustrations in this book that I really enjoy. They're not regular or consistent in any sense. There's just a couple sprinkled through the story, which is cool when they're kind of describing something, and the author has decided that they want you specifically to know exactly what this thing looks like in terms of visual detail, which is interesting. On the downsides of this book, I think by the end, thematically, the author wasn't quite sure what they were trying to say. The message of the book wasn't super clear of, like, emotionally what character arc is Claire going through, and what are we, the audience, supposed to take away from that. It got a little muddled right at the end, and so the last few scenes kind of let it fall for me in terms of the clarity of it. But, like, for the most part, it was really good. I think this one is, like, also a 4, but, like, it's leaning more towards a 3.5 because it's less cohesive than kind of the other ones that I read this month. The last thing that I read, which I spent time reading other books this month, it's just that I didn't finish them, so they're not going in this wrap-up because I'll probably finish them within the next month, and then they can go in the next one if I do a next one. I'm bad at consistency, but I'm not finished with them yet, so I'm not talking about them today. But I had to take a break from those ones, and I read Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness. I am borrowing this from a person, and so I don't have the jacket, but I do have this. Over the Top is a memoir by Jonathan Van Ness of the show Queer Eye on Netflix. If you're unaware, it's a good time, check it out, but you know, if you are, we'll just let the loud helicopter pass outside. Is that far enough away? Probably. We're probably good now. So, Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness is a memoir talking about his life and some of the struggles that he's gone through over the course of it. It's interesting, this is the second one of memoirs by the Fab Five of Queer Eye that I have read. I also read Tan France's memoir. I have not read Karamo's memoir yet, but I want to. And of the two, this one, I think, spends a little bit less time talking about, it's a lot more early years and struggles that he's gone through to get to where he is now, and a little bit less time talking about the show itself and what happened on the show itself and where he sits in relation to that. Not that that's necessarily bad, just something that I observed. It was a good time, it was interesting, I liked getting to see a little bit into the backstory of this almost character that you see on this reality TV show. And it was interesting, it's one of those things where, you know, objectively you understand that people are always people, and everybody has gone through something in their life. Everybody's gone through some shit somewhere. You know, everybody's got a backstory. But it's another thing to be confronted by how difficult and how harrowing some of that backstory can be when you're confronted with someone who presents themselves as so positive and so upbeat and so optimistic in a reality television show. Yeah, it's nice. It was insightful. It sounded exactly, it's written exactly the way that he speaks on the show. Like, you hear his vocal patterns of the way that he talks, and that's also the way that he writes, funnily enough. Gives it that little feeling of authenticity in the reading of it, which is nice. Yeah, and that's my thoughts on that. That's all the books I read in September. Woo!